saw bends in drum and bass. That's what we're going to talk about today. And I've got a couple of questions for you first, just to check in with you real quick. And I also want you to let me know if I'm right about this. But first of all, do you know what a saw bend is? Have you heard about this term before? And if you have, do you actually know how to make one? And the reason that I'm asking this is because it's a sound that used to be very popular in drum and bass, kind of like when Neuro was taking over, but it's a sound that is becoming increasingly more popular in drum and bass as we go. And probably the best example of this sound that you will probably know is the saw bend that is happening as sort of like the main bass in Ecstasy by Delta Heavy, which sounds a little bit something like this. But not just that, I've been hearing this sound come back a lot more by artists that are really up and coming. One of them is a guy from the Netherlands who's been absolutely crushing it after his Badadan remix called Tantron. You know, he just has these like really heavy saw bends in a lot of his songs. Another person that uses a lot of this kind of stuff is Reaper. Mefjus and Camo Krooked are very known for doing this kind of stuff. But also one of the fastest growing artists, I think probably in the drum and bass scene, Arcando, has also got a lot of this kind of stuff in his music. And the reason that I wanted to make this video is actually because of two reasons. The first one is that I started listening to Arcando's Rampage open air set, and I noticed that a lot of songs in there, I think most of his are his original songs, but also just the style that he plays that has become very popular is these big saw bends. So for example, something like this from his 2025 Rampage set.
1, 2, 1, 2.
Right, so that sound at the beginning, you know, something like that, or, and again, right? And there's numerous examples. I found a lot of them in this set, which has caused me to kind of think about, okay, this is probably something that the drum bass community needs to talk about. However, there is a small problem with that up until this day. First of all, there's not that many tutorials on it. I also don't know if it's really called a saw bend because it's quite a bit more complicated than that. That's the only term that I was able to find about it. But also, it is a sound that is actually rather difficult to produce sound design-wise, because unlike some other sounds like, you know, square leads or saw leads or some, you know, sort of basses that are a bit sort of squelchy that use the I-Can-Has kick wavetable, this has a lot more layers, a lot more EQing to it. And even though it sounds super fucking fat, I think a lot of people just don't know how to make that. And you can see that because online, there's just not that much about that. The only person that I've seen talk about this before is, well, myself in one video, which I'll talk about in just a second, but also this guy called Let's Synthesize, who is actually, if you don't follow him yet and you're serious about drum bass production, shout out to Let's Synthesize. He's an absolutely incredible sound designer, and he does a lot of the sort of neuro style stuff, very accurate reproductions of very complex basses, always does it in phase plant because there's a lot of layering and multiple oscillators involved, and up until recently you couldn't really do this in Serum, and on this channel we try to do everything in Serum to do things as simple and as accessible as possible. However, since the release of Serum 2, it is actually very possible, instead of making things very complicated with like multiple Serum 1 patches, to just make one in Serum 2, because we have a broader spectrum of effects, of layering, of buses, and of, you know, multiple oscillators that we can choose from now. So what I want to do in this video, first of all, on the channel, I want to talk way more about saw bends and go into a couple of Arcando songs and maybe some Mefjus songs and stuff like that to talk about how you go about doing these. But as an introduction, I just want to show you quickly something that I made before, which was in this video, which broke down actually the whole drop of Ecstasy by Delta Heavy. And actually everything in there was in Serum except for that saw bend, which sounded like this. And up until recently, the only way that I knew how to make this and the only way that was practical to make it was in phase plant. But as a start to introducing more saw bend knowledge to the community, I am going to recreate this exact bass in Serum as like a starting point for everyone to sort of see what are the different elements of this, why is it kind of complicated, and where, you know, where can you go wrong and just not end up with what you want at all, because that is something that happens quite a bit here. You need to be really specific about what to do. So that's what we're going to dive into today. We're going to be recreating this one that I have in phase plant, which in the broader context sounds like this. And then we're going to recreate that actually, and even I would say make it a little bit simpler, which actually sounds pretty much exactly the same, namely like this. Now, as always, you can download the free preset for this in the link below. Also the notes, which are very simple, but the rack of the Ableton rack of the other devices that are added on top of Serum 2. However, what we also did is this entire song, the whole drop recreation, including how to mix and master it and all the layering of the plucks and all the other elements, which is actually like a super good exercise to go through. We've got that inside the School of Drum and Bass. So if you want the project file for that, all the presets for all the other sounds and the full like tutorial, I think it's like more than an hour worth of tutorial of making it, and then also like half an hour of mixing and mastering it. You can check that out in the School of Drum and Bass. All right, so we are in Ableton right now in a new Ableton project file. This is not the one with the full recreation, but just for reference, the original song sounds like this. And then our recreation of the entire song, including the saw band that we made in Faceplant, which we'll get to in a second, sounded like this. So the goal of today's video is to look at the Faceplant one that we've built. Don't want to go too in depth on that because we do that already in this other video, but we're going to have a look at how to make that in Serum 2 in a way that is, a lot more understandable. Because, well, first of all, the one in Faceplant that we made sounds like this. And the one that we've made in Serum now sounds like this, which is pretty much exactly the same. So that's beautiful. And the reason that this has been complicated so far, I'll just run you through it really quickly. First of all, you can see a massive processing chain in post-processing after this, but mostly, the real magic comes from a lot of different things in Faceplant, because Faceplant has, it has plugins from this company called Kilohertz, and the unique thing about it is that unlike most other synths, what you could do is you could actually add each individual plugin as an effect. Unlike Serum, where it has just the built-in effects and that's it basically, you could import anything that was made by the same company that made Faceplant into here, and that's what you can see here as well. There's multiple lanes, or what's sometimes called buses now in Serum 2 also, where you drive something through one lane, then through the second lane, and through a third lane, but you can also decide per oscillator, and you basically have an unlimited amount of oscillators in here, which lane it's going to go in through. So essentially, before Serum 2 came out, what this was a way to make a super complicated layered patch in just one synth, rather than having like a separate sub that is processed differently, a top layer that is processed differently, a middle layer that is processed differently. So yeah, what you can see here is we have essentially what is like an FM'd sine wavetable that is also doing some like phase rotation with an LFO that has its own filtering going on, its own attack, that is then going through like a whole lane of pretty intense stuff. And also it's going through a disperser, which is also something we didn't used to have in Serum 1. And then we have another layer, which is basically the sub, which is getting processed differently. That's skipping all of these elements and it's going into lane 2, which is just, a little bit of extra sort of fatness to it. And then everything else goes into lane 3. This is something that was absolutely not possible in Serum 1, but is possible in Serum 3. And the nice thing about it is Serum just feels a lot more intuitive, right? This all, if you've never worked with it, feels very, very overwhelming. So without further ado, let's go have a look at how we can recreate this thing in Serum. Basically, we've got some notes here. The notes are very simple. They're just playing this particular note. So, if you want, you can download the MIDI along with a free preset for both of these in the link below. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a fresh Serum patch here. And so essentially what we're going to be doing is in this oscillator, we're going to create the sort of the bottom of the sound. So that's going to be sine based, and it's going to be what gives it a little bit of the kind of heaviness to it, like a distorted sort of subby heaviness almost. We're also going to be adding a sub here, which we're going to process differently. And for that, we have to dive into the buses. So that's very interesting. So stick around for that. Then we're going to have a wavetable that is going to basically FM this. So we're going to add another sine. We'll do that in a minute. That is going to affect this shape. And then basically all of this is going to determine the sub. And then separately, we're going to have a layer here made out of a wavetable that is essentially like what's called a melting saw that is going to give that top end crunch. And I'm just going to warn you, the first bit of this, it's all going to really sound very sucky, but then later we'll kind of tie together what we're doing and why this works. Okay, so having explained that, what I want to do is I want to sort of explain to you how we're going to route things, because this is a new thing in Serum 2. It's very necessary for all of these sounds. So if you have noticed, maybe you haven't, and then I'm going to explain it to you. We have this, if we go to the effects, we have a main bus, then we have bus 1, and then we have bus 2. And if we go into this mix section here, you can see that we can route basically anything to anything. So we can create a flow of processing. In Serum 1, there was only one flow of processing, or basically from the oscillators to the filter to the effects. Now we've got multiple options for that. So what we're going to do is we're first going to work on this sub right here. We're going to probably crank that level all the way up. What you can do here is you can press this little button, and this means that it's immediately routed to the main. Well, we don't want that. We actually want this to be routed to a separate bus so that it skips all the processing that we're going to be doing on all of this, because the sub needs to be a little bit easier, and we're going to be adding a lot of distortion and width here and stuff like that that we don't want in the sub. So we're going to set us up for that. We're going to go into this mix here, and actually we're going to select none. So what that means is now if I play this, you're not going to hear anything. If I had it on direct, then you would hear the subby frequencies, but I don't want that. What I want to do is I want this sound, but I want to route it to bus 2. That's because all the other stuff, so all of this, we're going to be routing to bus 1, but we'll talk about that in a second. This also doesn't need to go to the filter at all, so this is directly going to go into bus 2. So now if I'm going to put some things here that is just going to make this sub like a little bit fatter. So I'm just going to be adding a distortion here on a soft clip, you know, do something simple like that. I'm going to be adding a compressor, which we are actually going to use the safety limiter preset for, but we're just going to crank up that gain by about, I don't know, by about like 9 decibels or something, or maybe. And you can hear now that this sub is being processed through this bus. I'll show you more about that in just a second. Actually, maybe what I want to do is instead of a tube, I want to make this an overdrive so that it really becomes really fat. That's quite nice, right? And then I actually probably want to have a little bit of crunchiness on top. I'll explain more about that later. It's not super fitting for now, but we're going to link all the buses together in a second. Don't worry, it all makes sense. Okay, so if we go back into this mix now, what we can see is that this is all going to bus 2. Okay. Now that we've got that sorted, we're going to add our oscillators here. So I'm going to select some wavetables that actually are part of the phase plant wavetables. If you want those wavetables, I'm pretty sure you can download them for free online somewhere on Google. I can't promise that because I did it a long time ago and maybe that's not entirely legal. So if it isn't, don't do that. But what you could also do, I think you can get a trial. If there's not a free trial available, you can just spend $10 to get a monthly subscription of all the Kilohertz plugins, which is a total recommendation because a lot of that stuff is really cool. Or if you're really cheap, I do believe that I have the wavetables in the full tutorial of the entire drop in the School of Drum and Bass. You could also just go into the School of Drum and Bass, which link for that is below, and you can download them from there. So what I'm going to choose is I'm going to choose this rectified sine wave. If we go here to the phase plant wavetables, we go to the sines, we're going to get this rectified sine. And this looks like a normal sine at first, but if we move this along, you can see that it actually does become a rectified sine. If you don't know what that is, it doesn't really matter for this tutorial, and we're going to up that by about 2 octaves. And we're going to be doing a few things to that. So first of all, we're going to be adding another sine wave, and we're going to do some FMing. Unlike a lot of other FMing, I actually do want the level of this to be up. Normally you would kind of turn that down so that it only affects this, but I actually do want this sine in here for some extra oomph. And we're also going to place that up by 2 octaves and by 10 semitones. Now, if you're going to ask me why this specifically, we can have a look at this later, or you can experiment yourself. Changing this is going to change sort of the overall timbre of the sound. This is just specifically what I found works for the exact sound that we want to create, but it's not set in stone. What we're going to do then is we're going to go into this warp mode, and we're going to go to FM and FM from B. And so essentially, we're going to be adding just a little bit of that, probably about 13%. You can hear that this is actually starting to sound pretty fat. It, however, sounds nothing yet like what we need, and that's kind of what I was talking about before. And then the second layer, so this, I guess, would be one layer together, this would be one layer together. Okay, so maybe this is the third layer. We're going to grab another phase plant wavetable, and we're going to be getting the melting saw. And as you can see here, what's happening here, I think this is a phase dispersed saw, which is going to, I think, don't correct me, don't correct me on this if I'm wrong, just fucking shut up. No, but yeah, that's what we're going to do. We're going to grab this right here, and we're going to put that at 2 octaves and 7 semitones up. And once again, this is literally only to make the exact sound that we want, but later play around with these octaves and semitones and you'll get like an unlimited number of versions of this sound. For this melting saw, I want to create a little bit of unison. so that we have a little bit of dissonance in here. And then what I'm gonna do is this sound, these saw bands, they have a lot of movement. So you're free to create more movement on top of what I'm doing already, but I wanna create with just a simple LFO some movement in the phase and in the wavetable positions of some things. This is also something that you can just experiment with. We're just gonna do it this specific way because that's how we get to the end product that we want today. We're gonna head into this basic here. I'm gonna grab a sine. And instead of putting it on the rate, we're going to put it on hertz, and I want it to be at about 0.9 hertz. And what that's going to do is it's kind of going to go like wave through some of these things that we're going to put it on, rather than have like a super, defined shape. It's going to be kind of like swirly. So first of all, we're going to put it on the wavetable here, which is going to change it a little bit. And then I want to put it also on this phase here. And if you listen closely, if we turn this off, that's going to make it really quite dissonant, which is exactly what we're looking for here. We're going to be doing the same thing actually for this one right here. So yeah, this is the phase. It's just going to rotate the phase. So it's just going to make it out of sync with itself, basically. Honestly, this kind of sound is getting really close to fucking that haunting tune from Lavender Town in Pokemon Red. If you remember that, you're a fucking OG. If you don't remember that, I pray for your generation. Anyway, and then we're gonna do a couple of things. So all of this basically, sorry, actually the sub doesn't really matter, but both of these, I want to just keep the lows. So we're gonna quite aggressively gonna get a low MG4, and we're gonna put that probably around like maybe 200 hertz or something. And we're gonna put that on both A and B. So let's just hear the difference here. Right, that's what I want. And then for the other wavetable, we're just gonna take off a little bit of that sort of really sharp, the stuff that you get at the high end of the saw. So we're gonna place filter 2 on the C, and I just want an MG low 6 because we really only need just a little bit of this. And then I'm gonna dial that mix back a little bit like this, which just, yeah, makes it a little bit more tempered, which is what we want. Okay, so now we need to set up our buses, if we haven't done that correctly yet, to make sure that the signal flow of all the effects that we're gonna be adding on top of this, that are ultimately gonna shape it into what we want it to be, are going to make sense. So basically, I want the sub to be processed in lane 2. I want the other oscillators to be processed in lane 1 and then lane 2, and then all of that, lane 1 and 2, are going to feed into the main layer, and that's where we're going to be sort of like adding the final touches and making the sound complete. So we got to head over into this matrix, and I will say it's a little bit confusing how this works, because basically you can select here where it routes to mainly, but the buses you have to put in here. That's why here we clicked none. I actually don't want this to go out by itself. I just want to route it to one of the buses. That's why we put this knob up to bus 2. However, we're not going to do the same to oscillator A and oscillator B. These have to go to the filter, as you can see over here. And then the filter, right, which we can see here, that is going to feed into also none and also none, because those don't need to go out anywhere by themselves. They purely need to be routed to bus 1. So essentially, what's going to happen is oscillator A, B, and C are all going to be routed through the filter, and everything from the filter is going to be routed to be bus 1. And bus 1, I want to route bus 1 to bus 2, and bus 2 is going to go to the main. So basically, that means these oscillators are going first into this bus 1 right here, then into this bus 2, where we just did a little bit of processing for the sub, and then everything is going to go into main 1. That's how we've set this up right now. That means for bus 2, we're done now. That is just the sub, and we can work on the complicated part now of all the other oscillators. So for bus 1, we're going to be doing a couple of things. One of them is throughout sort of the effects that we're going to have, we're going to add multiple different types of distortions at different levels of mixes, because we want a lot of different flavor of fucking up the sound. Like a gangster. I don't know if that's like a gangster. You decide. Maybe leave me a comment if you think distortion is gangster. Okay, so for bus 1, first of all, we're going to be adding some width to the sound. This is a massive sound that's going to be taking up all of the space, basically, in any kind of mix. There's nothing really going to be playing under this that's very present. So we're going to get some hyper and dimension. Usually we would kind of scale back this mix, but actually we want quite a bit of it. And we're going to do the same for a chorus, although I would say we're going to dial that back just a little bit. And what's great about this now is that whole signal flow that we were talking about before, you can kind of hear that now, because even though the oscillators that we were talking about now, so melting saw and the frequency modulated rectified sine wave, they are going to bus 1, and we've only got this hyper dimension on here. After this bus 1, they are routed to bus 2, where we have already this overdrive. So we're getting already quite a little bit of that distortion that we were looking for. As you can hear, we're already getting quite close, and now we're just going to do sort of the finishing touches that make it sound the way that we want it to sound. And there's some important stuff in there as well that really can sort of make it or break it. So let's do that. So first of all, I want to add a distortion that is just really going to be quite over the top. So we're going to add probably another, actually not an overdrive. We're probably going to get the sine fold here. Now, as you can hear, this needs to be used in a very much moderation. So we're going to go down to something like, like this maybe, and then we're going to dial back that mix. So essentially it doesn't distort the whole sound, but we just get a layer of distortion added on top of it. Right, just a bit. And then we're going to do a similar thing. We're going to add another distortion, and we're going to be adding some hard clipping here to add another flavor of distortion essentially. I think maybe for this we keep the full mix, but let's see. All right, then next we're going to be doing a bunch of EQing. This is something that I will admit you can kind of do a lot better in Faceplant, because rather than having this sort of limited thing, you get an actual like 8-band EQ the way it works in Ableton. But we can still do it. So we're going to roll off some of the lows here, because the sub is going to be obviously processed separately. So those lows are already there. We don't need them in these 3 oscillators. Just bring that Q down, do something like this. And because this is going to have quite a crunchy top end, I also want to just probably introduce like a little bit of a shelf here. Maybe around sort of like the 5,000 hertz area. All right, that's definitely getting somewhere. And then what I want to do is I want to introduce 2 peaks here. So I'm going to go and give this quite a bit of gain, and this one as well actually. We're just going to mess around with where we want that frequency to be, and it's going to make it sound quite substantially different. So first of all, let's dial back this Q a little bit so that it becomes a bit more of a bigger bump. And if we move these around, right, like, has quite a, since it's 12 decibels of gain, has quite a profound effect on the sound. So after messing around for quite a bit, I'm going to put one of them at about 930 hertz. I think that sounded good to me. And I'm going to put the other one at about 600 hertz. And this is just because that's what I found sounds the most like what I want to achieve right now. But these 2 give you massive control over the real timbre of the sound. So without them, we got this. And with them, we've got this, which already sounds a lot more sort of tempered in, which is quite nice, I would say. We're really accentuating those mids. And also, because we got one big one around sort of almost 1,000, that's kind of where some of the juice and some of the vocal properties sometimes start beginning. So that's going to make it very present in the mix. All right, then, luckily, because normally we would have a disperser here for some extra sort of like, complicated timbre to the sound. I always fail at explaining what a disperser does, because it's such a smart, complicated thing, and sometimes it's so subtle, but it really, all the professional sounds these days are basically using disperser. We didn't used to have that in Serum, but right now in the filters of Serum 2, if we go here, we have this diffuser, which is essentially the same thing. So all we got to do is we got to up this resonance, and we got to up these stages here to something like this, and then just change that cutoff a little bit so that it affects the upper higher frequencies here. And you can hear it's adding just a little bit of subtle depth to what we're going to do. And once we're going to be later like compressing it more, that's going to come out a little bit more. And you should feel free to also play around with these knobs, because maybe for this sound it's a little bit less, but especially if you're working with really heavy sort of like squelchy, lasery sounds, this actually has a lot of, like, it can really add a lot to a sound to change a couple of the knobs around and sort of see what you come up with. Some really interesting creative results. Now that we've got that sorted, I want to put another distortion on there, and we're just going to grab maybe another overdrive here. Going to put the drive up by quite a bit, so this is almost going to squarify it. But then, of course, we're going to, put that mix back a little bit. And then, we just, I don't know if I want to do this, but let's add a little bit of extra top shelf stuff here. Maybe probably a little bit later, maybe around sort of like the 2800 hertz area. And then what we're going to do is we want to really compress this sound and make it as loud as possible. So we're going to be adding a OTT on there. So yeah, what's also nice about Serum 2 is that we just have all these really nice presets now for the OTT. So we're just going to grab one of those. And then after that, I'm going to be grabbing another compressor, which we're going to put on the limiter here, so that, I mean, we have enough distortion as it is. It doesn't need to clip, but if we put some gain into the limiter, or at least put some gain into this compressor here after having compressed it already, we can really do some upwards compression and some upwards expansion, which is going to do the sound a lot of good. So we're going to, this compressor that we just made, and put it on the safety limiter here. And on this compressor here, the OTT, we're going to just crank this gain up. So listen to this. Probably going to put this very exaggeratedly at like 1500. All right, great. Now, you can hear that this is definitely too much. And I have a few times that I have a high shelf here because I felt like that was what I needed. I might either remove those or do some more EQing later. And this is sort of the process of building something that is this complicated. You keep adding things that maybe sort of, you know, cancel each other out a bit until you find the right mix, and then you try to go back and make it as simple as possible, which is something that we'll do. All right, great. So now we have the sub feeding into bus 2 here. We have these oscillators feeding into bus 1 here and then feeding into bus 2. So all of this is actually also going through all of these effects here. Now, all of this is going to route to the main, and I want to do some final things in the main to really sort of get the sound where it needs to be. So just because we, you know, apparently don't have enough distortion, I'm going to add another distortion, maybe like a soft clip type thing. And then I'm going to do what probably is going to have the most impact on it. I have all the frequencies in this sound that I want. This whole complex thing of all the distortion and all the EQing and etc. has given me everything that I need. Now I need to decide how much of the lows, the mids, and the highs I need. And there's various ways that you can do this. You can do this with another OTT. I'm just going to go grab an equalizer. And what I want to do is I want this to be much more bass heavy. So we're going to grab a shelf here. And anything above sort of the 200 hertz, we're going to probably give some extra boost. And then a lot of those, you know, really distorted highs, I want to probably get rid of a bunch of that. So we're going to do something like this. However, what I also want to do is I kind of want to add another bump around the 2000 hertz area, maybe like 2400 or something. Bring that Q up a little bit, but really not that exaggerated. So yeah, let's go somewhere here, and let's just add like maybe 3 decibels. And you can see here that this is, you know, this is quite counterintuitive, right? Because we just ducked this, and then we, you know, are adding back some stuff here. That is unfortunately just a way of sound design. Like I said, we can go back into this later and sort of kind of fix that and make it more simple. But this is just a result of what I was doing while I was listening, and this is probably how you'll do it as well. Let's add maybe like 6 decibels to here. And then, you know, why not add another distortion over that? And so the reason that we have all these different distortions in there is, first of all, because we can have different layers of different distortions, but also because we can distort something, then do more different effects over it that are going to sort of change it around and change the phase and change the width and stuff like that, and then distort that again. So it'll be a different type of distortion, even if it's the same, you know, even if it's 2 times an overdrive. If they're in different places, they're going to do something slightly different. Great, and this whole bass does sound like a little bit unstable, right? It sounds like the speaker can barely handle it, and that's kind of what we want here. And then finally, we're gonna add another limiter here, and then we're gonna crank up that gain by, let's say, about 12 decibels again. And I would say that we're almost there. Hey, sorry to interrupt, but if you're watching this video, then my guess is that you're trying to become better at producing professional sounding drum and bass. And if you are taking that seriously, then you may want to hear about the School of Drum and Bass. The School of Drum and Bass is my passion project, and it's a membership that contains over 300 videos about music production in general, but also specifically about how to produce drum and bass. And there's just so much content in there. It doesn't matter whether you are a total beginner or if you've been producing for several years, because we go over everything. We cover very basic things like how to use Ableton, and all the way to, you know, what drum and bass actually is and how layering works and what the common drum patterns are and all those fundamentals. We have hours and hours of in-depth Serum tutorials aimed at making you a master of the synth and finally being able to translate the sounds that you hear in your head to something that sounds awesome in your synthesizer so that you can create any drum and bass sound that you want. Plus also the theory behind how that works. We also include professional mixing and mastering classes, for example, like sessions where we take an unmastered and an unmixed song and walk you through through step by step how to make that sound professional, how to get that industry grade loudness and clarity. And one of the best things is we also have an entire section of complete drop breakdowns where we walk you through a recreation of a full drop of a popular song, and there's many of them in there where we go step by step, all the layers, making everything from scratch, how to recreate songs that you love. Also, very soon we're even going to be adding complete start to finish song courses where we literally walk you from the very beginning to the very end into making a complete song step by step, taking you through how to make everything, make the drums, make all the layers, everything from scratch, and teaching you so many things you would have never found on YouTube. Actually add new videos every single week. Things like in-depth tutorials on super creative sound design, arrangement exercises, breaking down like the secrets of hot artists right now and what we can learn from them and what we can take away. Honestly, the School of Drum and Bass right now is probably the biggest, but definitely the most comprehensive drum and bass production learning resource out there on the internet today. And the best part is that right now we have a super special deal. The first 7 days you can join for just £1 So if that sounds like you and you may want to check that out, then go to the link in the description down here, or simply go to howtodrumandbass.com and make today the first day of your journey towards becoming a professional drum and bass producer. All right, now without further ado, let's move on with the rest of this video. So just some finishing touches for this sound. First of all, I want to give it some reverb, so I'm going to add a third-party reverb at the end here. Also, of course, what I want to do if I do that is after that place a limiter, or maybe even a clipper. I'm not entirely sure. Now that is obviously way too much, so we're going to dial back this, and we're going to dial back this. But that's going to make it sound a little bit roomy because this is essentially like a really big sound, so we do need that reverb on it. And then what we need to do as well, just specifically for this, but generally also a cool tool to kind of mess around with saw bends, is pitch bend. Now, mind you, we could actually do that with another LFO here. And, you know, we can put that on like the global master tuning or the chorus pitch of all of these. I find that sometimes, for some reason, that just doesn't yield the result that you want. And we have a lot more fine control, and we can kind of see the number of how much hertz we're changing in the fine control here. So I'm going to be making a shifter here. And I'm just going to go and press this fine button here. And I've got automations turned on. And I want to just have a separate automation lane here. And I'm going to draw a little bit of automation in here where it's going to basically change the pitch upwards a little bit, because it's going to go, it's going to go up. It's going to give it a lot more suspense. But once again, this is somewhere where you can really do a lot of really cool stuff with this saw bend. You can make it go up and down or make it wobble. This is like a really good creative option for you to mess around with as well. And then additionally, something that I like to do sometimes is when you have a sound that is a little bit dissonant and that has, you know, just a lot of sort of like a range, like it's like a wall of sound. If we're playing a note, I like to sort of, you know, get the resonance of the notes that it's supposed to be playing and put a little bit of an EQ on there as well. So that's what we're going to do here. If you go and see these nodes, if we go in here, we can see actually here, if you look at this part right here, the note that we're playing is F3, and I'm just accentuating a little bump of frequencies around 3 notes of F. So it's essentially almost accentuating a bit of a chord, and that's just going to make it a tiny bit stronger. If you view that versus, it's just going to take the sort of the melodic, there's no melodic content in here, whatever. It's just something that makes it sound a little bit more present in regards to the other things that are actually playing proper notes. But this is absolutely not necessary. All right, great. And now what we can do is we can go back in here. I mean, we've pretty much already arrived at this sound, right? And we can change a couple of things to, you know, change this sound to be a little bit more full and a little bit less crunchy on that top end, because that top end really is quite crunchy. So maybe I want to turn this down even more. Because you can hear that top end distortedness doesn't really sound so good, does it? And I think maybe what we need to do is we need to move this up a little bit so that we just, you know, we keep all of the stuff here, which is essentially the body of the sound. I think this already sounds like a lot better. Maybe even turn it down a bit more. Something like that. And we can also control the bass frequencies here now, even though you would probably layer this with a sub, but you know, that's probably going to be distorting a bit. But so yeah, this is pretty much the sound that we were looking to make. And then the last thing that you could do, which I do like to do sometimes, is you can get a K clip after or before the realm actually, and you can just make this a lot louder. Or if you didn't want to do that, you can go back into this Serum patch and, you know, increase any of the levels here. You could, for example, take more gain on the compressor into the limiters and stuff like that. There's all kinds of things that you can do. All right, well guys, that was the video for today. I really hope you enjoyed that. I hope you learned something. If this was too complicated for you, which is absolutely totally fine, I would recommend you one of two things. First of all, if you care about sound design, go through the tutorial a couple of times. This is something that is, once you get this, it's going to open like a whole new world of like making music for you, especially if you like the heavier stuff. But a lot of this is also being used in dance floor stuff now. Like for example, Mefjus is, you know, doing mostly neuro stuff, but Camo and Krooked and Mefjus are making a lot of dance floor that has these kinds of basses under it, but that are, you know, actually also have like melodic vocals and stuff like that. And that's becoming more popular. And Dramatic is doing it. Arcando is doing a bunch of stuff like this. Tantron is doing a bunch of stuff like this. So it is actually something really cool that adds a lot of punch into your productions. With that being said, we're going to end the tutorial here. If you liked this, please do consider helping me out by leaving a comment. That would help gigantically for me. Also liking the video, if you will. I mean, it's just going to take you 1 second, but it's going to help me put out more videos for you. Also, the free preset right down in the description below. But if you did enjoy my teaching style, and if you want to learn more about drum and bass production like the professionals, and you want to just have, you know, more tutorials like this that are way more in-depth, and, you know, also if you just want to see the entire tutorial of this entire song, please go ahead and check out the School of Drum and Bass, which really, it's only £1, so I mean, why not just give it a go, right? All right, thank you for taking the time to make music with me today. I really do appreciate that, and good on you for working on your dreams. I hope to see you in the next one. Hey, sorry to interrupt, but if you're watching this video, then my guess is that you're trying to become better at producing professional sounding drum and bass. And if you are taking that seriously, then you may want to hear about the School of Drum and Bass. The School of Drum and Bass is my passion project, and it's a membership that contains over 300 videos about music production in general, but also specifically about how to produce drum and bass. And there's just so much content in there. It doesn't matter whether you are a total beginner or if you've been producing for several years, because we go over everything. We cover very basic things like how to use Ableton and all the way to, you know, what drum and bass actually is and how layering works and what the common drum patterns are and all those fundamentals. We have hours and hours of in-depth Serum tutorials aimed at making you a master of the synth and finally being able to translate the sounds that you hear in your head to something that sounds awesome in your synthesizer so that you can create any drum and bass sound that you want. Plus also the theory behind how that works. We also include professional mixing and mastering classes, for example, like sessions where we take an unmastered and an unmixed song and walk you through step by step how to make that sound professional, how to get that industry grade loudness and clarity. And one of the best things is we also have an entire section of complete drop breakdowns where we walk you through a recreation of a full drop of a popular song, and there's many of them in there where we go step by step, all the layers, making everything from scratch, how to recreate songs that you love. Also, very soon we're even going to be adding complete start to finish song courses where we literally walk you from the very beginning to the very end into making a complete song step by step, taking you through how to make everything, make the drums, make all the layers, everything from scratch, and teaching you so many things you would have never found on YouTube. Actually add new videos every single week. Things like in-depth tutorials on super creative sound design, arrangement exercises, breaking down like the secrets of hot artists right now and what we can learn from them and what we can take away. Honestly, the School of Drum and Bass right now is probably the biggest, but definitely the most comprehensive drum and bass production learning resource out there on the internet today. And the best part is that right now we have a super special deal. The first 7 days you can join for just £1 British pound. So if that sounds like you and you may want to check that out, then go to the link in the description down here, or simply go to howtodrumandbass.com and make today the first day of your journey towards becoming a professional drum and bass producer. All right, now without further ado, let's move on with the rest of this video.